have with us today Jeremy McGill with Gallagher.
All right, thank you, Matt. Well, I cover Kentucky and Tennessee, so I'm the territory manager for Gallagher, then I also cover the whole Southeast and do product support for my team down here. Don't want to get too deep in the bushes with you on fencing, but I do want to try to show you some new ideas, maybe some things you've never tried before, and maybe you'll learn a new way to do something that's easier. But one thing to keep in mind, there's as many ways to build fence as there are people that build fences. So if I do something that's not the way you've done it, don't get mad at me. There's a lot of ways that work, but the way I'm going to show you is a way that you can build fence, and it'll be a very effective, strong fence, and also to meet NRCS specs. So if you're doing NRCS projects or CAPE projects on fencing that require you to follow NRCS specs, then building a brace like this and the fence structure like this will meet spec. So this was designed to be an example that the extension office could use here to bring people out later on in the future. We've been doing these around Kentucky and Tennessee for probably about 20 years now, and I've been doing them for 15 with Gallagher. If you can use a galvanized ground rod, galvanized high tensile wire for your ground wire, and use a brass or galvanized clamp. You're not going to have any electrolysis, no corrosion like that. Don't share the same ground system with your power service on your barn or your house for your electric fence ground. Two completely different concepts. If I were to go to that livestock building and cut the ground wire off of it, would the light still come on? Where the ground rod's driven in the ground, if I cut that wire, does the light still come on? Yes. Matter of fact, you probably go to any old farmhouse or tool shed in Hardin or LaRue County, and most of the ground wires have been eat off for years and nobody's checked it because the thing was put in 1952. So the ground rod for that building is for safety reasons. That's why your ground is there. It's part of the safety system of the electrical circuit. The ground system for your electric fence is not for safety, but for shocking reasons. This is how the animal gets shocked, is because of this ground system. So the animal goes up to the fence, touches the hot wire, the pulse goes through the animal's body, back through the soil, all the way back to it's trying to get to the energizer to complete the circuit. The energizer's sitting there ticking, touching it out there. It goes back to the soil. This ground system is like an antenna. It picks up the signal from the cow touching the fence. Well, this is hooked to the energizer, so this is where the circuit gets completed. If I remove the ground system, the animal doesn't get shocked. If I use a Muhlenberg County ground rod, animal doesn't get shocked very well most of the time. Now, it may work for a while, and y'all know what a Muhlenberg County ground rod is, don't you? It's more prevalent in Tennessee. Yeah. Rust does not conduct electricity. And a rusty piece of rebar or a rusty T-post is not a ground system, because that ground system is conducting electricity. Electricity is coming out of the cow through the ground to here to the energizer, completes the circuit. So this gets hot just for a split second, but this has to get hot and it has to conduct. If I've got an old rusty piece of rebar from my ground rod or an old T-post with wire wrapped around a hose clamp, that I don't have much. Now again, it may work 11 months out of the year to keep 15-year-old cows in that was born in an electric fence, but don't expect it to be effective. And for $10 a ground rod, it's pretty cheap to put in a complete, correct galvanized system. And that's UK's recommendation, NRCS's recommendation. It's not just Gallagher, but the minimum would be 3 ground rods, 6 foot deep, 10 foot apart. That's the minimum. 3 galvanized ground rods, 6 foot deep, 10 foot apart. The circumference of the rod's important, but typically a 1/2 inch rod. A 1/2 inch rod can cover about a 5 foot radius. So that's where the science is behind driving 10 foot apart. Because this ground rod's going to cover a 5 foot circle at a 1/2 inch. Now 5/8 will go up to like 6 So 3 ground rods, 6 foot deep, 10 foot apart. That's the minimum recommendation from UK and NRCS. And as you go up in power, in horsepower, in joules of your Energizer, then you'll have to add more ground rods. Componentry and accessories and quality, you definitely get what you pay for. And you can save a penny or two here and there, and you can go way overboard on something. But the main thing is find something that's a happy medium, that's got a good quality for the price, and think about what kind of time span you're looking for. If you're not expecting your plastics to last more than 3 or 4 years, then definitely go buy the cheapest insulator you can find, or the cheapest plastic temporary poster you can find. Some people, they do like, I guess their annual exercise routine is to go out and walk their fence line and replace their yellow insulators, because they know they're going to break off every 3 years. So they just go around every year and replace a third of them, and they go back to the store and they buy the same cheap insulators that eventually turn white, and then they get mad. Well, the deer hit the fence and the insulator broke off, got brittle and cracked, gotta go fix it again. So you can prevent that by, of course, the little ears. You know how the little ears will break off, that'll make you mad. Take a piece of wire and you baling wire back on there for a year, then the wire rust, and y'all been there. You see your neighbors do that, right? So you can save yourself a little grief by going with a higher quality insulator, and there's about a half a dozen companies that will make a high quality, heavy duty UV stabilized insulator. And that's what costs extra, the UV inhibitors they put in the plastic, but that's what's going to make an insulator last 15 years compared to 3 years, is the amount of UV inhibitors in them. Also keep an eye on just the overall quality and brittleness of the plastic. Some insulators are a very, very brittle plastic, and you can see here over time, this was an insulator that high tensile wire had started just from daily friction. There's always a standing wave in it. High tensile wire started to cut through the pin on that, but that is a solid core brittle pin. And the remedy for that is, if the insulator doesn't break first, is you have to stick a nail or a steeple or something in there and hold it once the pin falls out. But you can get insulators with a high density plastic type pin that's made to take a lot of force and friction. Because that high tensile wire is always sitting there moving with the standing waves. Even when the wind's not blowing, it's always going to have a little bit of movement to it. And over time, it can wear in too, depending upon the quality of the products. Make sure your underground cable for electric fence is class 3 galvanized. If it's not class 3 galvanized, after it sets out, after you skin the insulation back to joint clamp it, then this will start to rust in 4 or 5 years. And you can buy a lot of wire. The cheapest wire you can buy is not class 3, so it'll rust. If that has rust on it, and I've got that connected to my high tensile fence, my electricity is going to slow down in that rust because it causes resistance. So stay away from rusty wire, stay away from copper wire, and only use class 3 galvanized products on your electric fence. So the alternative would be to the house wire is to go with an underground cable. You can get single insulated and double insulated. The single insulated, if it's buried direct in the ground, it will eventually short out, and it may not take more than 3 or 4 years to do it. The double insulated, and there's probably 3 or 4 companies at least that make this now. The double insulated got a hard inner coating and then a larger outer coating. The double insulated is made to direct bury. You don't have to put it in conduit, you don't have to put it in pipe, but if you go under a gateway, then I would recommend putting it in some type. It doesn't have to be conduit, but just some kind of old cheap black roll plastic. Something to keep pressure and rocks off of it. And if you ever did have a problem, you can easily get it in and out. You caulk the ends of it up, seal the ends with foam or caulk, so water doesn't get in there and cause it to freeze. But otherwise, if I was going to go under a gateway out here where I fenced off a pond or a patch of woods, and I've got a gateway that I use 3 times a year on the 4-wheeler to go turkey hunting, then you can direct bury this and not have to put it in a pipe or comment. You just bury it about 6 inches or a foot, leave it alone, no traffic. So double insulated, this will save you some grief in the future. To strip double insulated cable, I usually take a pair of cutters, of wire strippers, and so this is 12.5 gauge wire, which is very important. Make sure your double insulated cable is the same diameter or larger than your fence wire. So if you're using 12.5 gauge fence wire, make sure you're using 12.5 gauge cable, not the 16 gauge. Because this is my lead out. This is where I'm putting all my power through to get to the fence. It's my water hose. I never want to take a 3/4 inch water line and plumb it into my water meter and then get halfway across the farm and go into a 2 inch, right? I lose all my pressure. Same way with electricity. Never start out with a skinny wire and try to go to a bigger one. Always start out with the largest wire possible, and then if you drop down, so you can go 12.5 gauge, 12.5 gauge, and then you can drop down to your poly wire or something that's smaller diameter with the metal in it. So I'll take a pair of wire strippers. Since that's 12.5 gauge wire, I'll typically hit the 10 gauge notch and go around it a couple times like that, where I'm not cutting into the steel. And then take a pair of pliers, and here's the trick, Matt. Take a pair of pliers and break that bond to that inner coating. So just squeeze on it a few times like that, maybe spin it, squeeze this outside, and now save you a little bit of grief. Let's talk real quick about temporary fence, because if there's one thing you can do to actually get a return on your investment pretty quick, is to do some type of rotational grazing. Typically, temporary fence is the most efficient, easiest way to perform some type of managed grazing. And y'all have heard your extension service harp on it for years. We know managed grazing works and it does pay. It's easy to do, as long as you don't make it too hard on yourself. So, a couple things to keep in mind for making it too hard on yourself is make sure you're selecting the right wire, the right poly wire for temporary fence. Now you can get poly wire and poly tape in all different sizes and shapes and colors and compositions. The first thing to consider, what color shows up the best? White. It just so happens that almost every land-grant university in the United States agrees that cattle and horses and small ruminants can contrast one color better than any other color against a green grass background or a dirty brown stockpile fescue in the fall, and that's white. Cattle, small ruminants, horses cannot contrast yellow as good as white. So, and if you look at it, I mean, we think, yellow, that's industrial, that's what the yellow flashing lights and workers used to wear yellow vests or whatever to be seen. But think about that. If an animal can see it, they'll respect it. Guess what else can contrast white against green grass? Deer. Deer. If deer can see it, do you think a deer just spends its whole life wandering around trying to find somebody's poly wire to tear down?
I don't wonder.
You would wonder. Yes. But actually, deer, they don't want to get shocked any more than that cow does. And deer learn to respect electric fence, but they have to be able to see it, and it's got to be hot. Don't ever leave poly wire up that's not hot. Because as soon as you do leave a section of it off and turn cows in, the baby calves go up there and chew on it first thing. And also, if it's not turned on, then deer will not respect it. So you can train your deer to this just like you can your cattle. So always go with a white poly wire or poly tape. I like the poly wire better than I do the poly tape. The tape is more visible, yes, but I can't fit as much of it on a reel, and the wind catches it, and I have to put my posts closer together. But to train animals, there's nothing wrong with tape. I just wouldn't want to use it all the time. It's a great training tool. If you go buy a bunch of heifers at a graded heifer sale or something, you don't know if they've been on a farm with electric fence or not, and you want to train them first, then use the tape. And you don't have to just dump them out in the pasture with one cross fence way out there and let them get a good run and run through it before they see it. The best way to do it is have a receiving lot or a holding lot. Most people have something like that with cattle panels or woven wire, and then put an offset on the inside of that woven wire receiving lot and run you a strip of poly wire or poly tape about 20-30 feet off of the perimeter, and just stop it in the middle of the field and heat it up. And that way, when you dump those new heifers or bulls or steers or whatever out, and they start circling the pen to get to the water and the mineral, they're going to come up and they're going to hit the wire. Well, if they've never seen it before, they may run under it or run through it or get shocked by it. And if they do, they're still caught. But they will eventually learn as they're walking that pen, instead of getting shocked, they're just going to keep following the perimeter. Now, they can come up here and go around it and get the water or get their mineral, but that's how you train cattle. There are many, many different types, compositions, and diameters of poly wire. And what we see here is a classic example. So both of those are white. Both of them are made by the same company. This one is 40 times more conductive, measurably, with an ohm meter. 40 times more conductive than this one. And they both look similar from a distance. This is 6 strands of stainless steel. Stainless steel is pretty cost effective to produce, but stainless is not a good conductor. It's a pretty poor conductor. But companies are able to manufacture it and offer a product that costs a little bit less, but is good for distances of 1,000 foot or less. So plain old 6-strand stainless steel, 1,000 foot or less. Once you get past 1,000, you start building too much resistance and you can't carry the voltage. This is this is 9-strand stainless, or this is 6-strand stainless. This one that's 40 times more conductive, 40 times less resistance, is a 9-strand. And it's not just stainless, it's a blended metal. There's some tinned copper, so not regular copper, but copper with a tin coating on it to keep it from corroding. And a couple other things in there that are proprietary. And every company has their own little proprietary mix on their high conductive poly wires. So this and this may look the same, but this is much more conductive and will last longer because it's a little bit thicker in diameter and you can carry power longer distances. If you've got an 8-strand fence and 4 of them are hot, because that's a lot of contractors will do that, they'll build every other strand hot, and it's not a true hot ground fence, then those 4 other strands are serving no purpose other than just a visual barrier. What you're doing is you've got 4 hot ones and 4 dead ones, and I'm leaving half of my conductivity on the table. So my fence is only half as conductive as it could be when I make all 8 of them hot. More strands carry more power for longer distances. So 1 strand, 56 ohms per mile. That's the resistance on 1 strand of high tensile. 2 strands of high tensile jumped in parallel, both ends. So I'll go up and down there, up and down here. 26 ohms per mile. Yeah, 24 and a half or so ohms per mile. That's 2 strands. If I keep adding strands, my resistance goes down and down and down. I can get down to single digit ohm. I'm wanting 0. I want no resistance. Every time I add a strand of wire, my resistance drops. So if I have 8 strands and 4 hot and 4 are not, if I make them all 8 hot, my fence is twice as conductive because of less resistance. If I have 2 strands of high tensile wire get mashed together by a tree limb, whether it goes all the way to the ground or not, then I have a dead short. If this is a true ground wire that's connected back to here, it's a dead short. Where at home, if I have 5 strands that get mashed plumb on the ground, it's not the end of the world. If I've got 5 strands touching the ground for a section that long, my fence is not shorted out. Now, I've got a good ground system, and I've got an energizer that's not just a little toy either, and I can maintain power. But if it was a true hot ground, and I've got a dead short. Does that make sense? They're very effective if they're built right, which that's what you got to watch out for. You're getting two wires together. Soaking in ground rods. Everybody hates to drive ground rods because you get a T-post driver and you beat and beat and beat, and then you get down to this high off the ground and there you are. You've got this much ground rod sticking out and you're out a T-post driver. So then you whoop on it with a sledgehammer and it's doing this and flopping around. You've hit yourself in the toe 2 or 3 times. So, notwithstanding rock, you're not going to go through rock doing it like this, but if you take a 5-gallon bucket of water with about that much water in it and take your heel and make you a little divot. This works in the summertime too, believe it or not. Your neighbors will think you're crazy if they see you trying it because they'll tell you it won't ever work, but you'll show them it will. Take you a divot, pour a little water in it, let it set for a minute, let it soak up just for 15-20 seconds. Pour a little more water in it, and then take your 6-foot ground rod, and don't get excited, don't get in a hurry, you don't even have to break a sweat. And your neighbor can be over there beating and banging and mad, and you'll just be sitting here like this, working that ground rod up and down. And you're going to make a hole. Before you know it, that hole's about that deep, and you start hearing suction because you got water in it. Pull the ground rod out, pour a little more water in that hole, and just stand there and work it up and down. And before you know it, you'll be down like this, and you'll have that much ground rod sticking out, and you won't ever have broken a sweat. And then you take a sledgehammer and finish it off. But you can soak a ground rod in, a 1/2-inch ground rod, with about 1 gallon of water. So we talked about polywire reels. Your polywire reels, you can get all kinds of different options to make things easier if you want to. You can get them that's geared, where you turn the reel 1 time and the thing spins 3 times. You can get them with handles, you can get them with clips where they'll actually clip onto your high tensile wire and lock on there and not fall off. Temporary fence posts. There are umpteen different options of temporary fence posts. One that I used to use quite a bit of on a single strand is the old pigtail design. And these are great for a single strand. They're almost indestructible except for a bush hog. And bush hog will destruct them. But these are quick and easy to use, work great for single strand nose level on a cow. If you want them to be a little bit lower, so you've got stocker steers or something or younger, then you just put it in an angle and you keep lower. And I guess if you're running pygmy goats or something, then you can do like that. But limited to 1 strand. Now you can get special insulators that have the back cut out of them that are made to go over a rod that you can put on a pigtail. Sometimes you can find insulators that just fit over the pigtail and screw on, but typically for single strand. The problem with these, there's 2 problems really. One is a lot of the cheap ones, this is a vinyl coating. And a vinyl coating, you can take your thumbnail and sit there and work at it enough and wear a hole in it. This polywire is pretty rank stuff. If you had a couple of sticks and a piece about that long, then you could saw a tree limb into probably that big around pretty quickly. And those 9 little metal strands in there are just like razors. So that polywire is always sitting here working back and forth, especially if you go down the dip and you got polywire that's pulling up on it doing this. So even with the high density material, like on this post, which this is an obsolete post now, but even with this high density material, you can wear through and look what's on the inside of it. What does that make this post become? A ground rod. So that's one thing to keep in mind with pigtails. The alternative to that was to get away from the steel and the plastic, the steel in the head and the plastic, and come out with a post that has 0 plastic in it. So this is a glass reinforced nylon. It's not plastic, and there's no steel that runs through the ring top of this post. So this will take thousands and thousands of miles of turbo wire pulled through it before it even starts to show anywhere, where 1/3 as much turbo wire pulled through a heavy duty pigtail would have already made it a ground rod. So this is Glassfield Nylon. It's not going to wear through, and there's no steel up here. And plus, with that ring top, it is just as effective as a pigtail for getting wire in and out of, except it doesn't get as tangled as the pigtails do. And the same thing on the foot, just two different deals. That's just a standard duty. But the foot, there's no plastic in that foot. That's Glassfield Nylon. Same thing on this. It's just a little heavier reinforced foot. But these feet are stronger than what these were. So the engineers, when they designed this, they finished it, they took two of these, welded them together like that, and put them in a vise and started squeezing down on the feet just to see practically how much pressure it would take to break the Glassfield Nylon. Well, all they could do is just keep bending the feet on the old pigtails, and never could damage the structure of that Glassfield Nylon. So pretty revolutionary material. We started using it in a bunch of stuff now, the Glassfield Nylon. So ring top post, easier to work with than a pigtail, great for single strands. You can get insulators to move multiple levels. If not, you can get those in a multi-lug ring top if you are doing sheep and goats, or if you don't want your calves creep grazing or getting out of the temporary fencing. If you're doing cow-calf, then you can get a multi-lug ring top like this and a Glassfield Nylon clip, and it does have specific notches that it has to go into. You can't just randomly put it anywhere on the post, but you've got several options there on height. But that's multi-species option. Obviously, you can go with the traditional type all plastic poly post that are multi-lug. Keep in mind, you get what you pay for. So a good UV stabilized post like this is worth the extra money. Of course, if you like to garden and you raise tomatoes, then you can buy the posts like this, and then after a few years when they've set out in the sun, you can have yourself some tomato stakes, because these little ears break off. You're either going to have to get smaller livestock or change post. So that is, you have to manipulate this to get the wire in and out of. You have to. You can't just do a hooey and flip it in like you can a pigtail. The difference with these open lug posts are I do not have to manipulate or touch any part of my wire to work the fence. So I can work a hot fence, I can insert the wire just using the post only. And sir, if you will hold that orange handle right there. Thank you. So you can work this fence if it's hot, laying there on the ground popping. Maybe you've spooled your reel out and hooked up a gate handle already, and you left it hot to keep the cows from crossing over to stockpile fescue, something like that's a pretty common scenario. I can reach down and I can catch it with that post and twist it, and now I'm working a hot fence. And with the foot being turned perpendicular to me, then I can get to it pretty easy. Now another thing, when it comes time to get the wire out of this post, instead of having to pull apart that little Mickey Mouse ear that breaks off, I turn my post and it comes out. Never have to do any of this snatching and grabbing and tomato stick making. So, bracing, some posts like this will have a crook on the end of them, and I can use those for making. Now I can't just get crazy, but I can turn a pretty good little corner in the pasture with that. Otherwise, I'm going to start pulling it over if I don't brace it sometimes.